Subscribe to Plunder.
There was a few times that we were having a conversation and he would be talking to me, Kevin, he would fall asleep mid-sentence and wake up, snap, and he would snap out of it 5 or 10 seconds later and keep talking right where he left off.
That's weird.
Yeah, it always blew my mind. I was like, this guy must really like me if he is avoiding sleep to be with me. And it was I couldn't do it. I napped probably almost every single day after I hung out with him.
Nicole Kessinger became so familiar with Special Agent Kevin Kobach with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation that she began to call him by his first name, giggle, laugh, call and text him at various hours during the first weeks of the Chris Watts investigation. Her body language says it all when dealing with Kobach, speaking a different language than when dealing with women. Perhaps Nikki was trying to Sharon Stone her way into his good graces and take the cop down with her feminine wiles, a la Basic Instinct. Maybe that's why Nikki was handed off to a different cop in an effort not to continually waste Agent Kobach's time with her mood swings and protracted conversations where she sits on the phone or in person, letting the hours while away as she pretends to not recall important facts regarding her time with Chris Watts. While I was researching Nicole Kessinger's 663 phone calls from July 14th to September 13, 2018, to various individuals and from various individuals for an upcoming video I'm researching, I uncovered Nikki's pattern of calls and contacts as they switched from Chris Watts prior to the pivotal August 15th day of his arrest over to Agent Kobach as her main point of contact in ensuing days. Nikki very well might have been in shock and perhaps rightly considered a victim or witness in the controversial case. But it's apparent from the discovery that by September 4th, 2018, Kobach might have been annoyed as fudge by Nikki Kessinger's constant contacting him. Kessinger met with Detective Dave Baumhover instead, lead detective for Frederick Police Department, that day, September 4th, 2018, instead of once again calling Kevin, and she turned in 7 pages of notes about the things she remembered, as instructed. For those who haven't been following the case since 2018, this might be the first time you've seen Nikki's 7 pages of notes. For those of us who have, it is an interesting refresher, including Nikki's claims about Chris bringing condoms to her place, how she checked the date of them, and his alleged problems with Shanann Watts. So let's take a look. Okay, so let's take a look at what was written on Discovery page 1058. It's Supplemental 50 by Detective Baumhover. He wrote, on September 4th, 2018, at approximately 1300 hours, so that would be 1 p.m., I met with Nicole Kessinger at the CBI headquarters located at 690 Kipling Street, Lakewood, Colorado. I was introduced by CBI Special Agent Kobach, who had interviewed her several times previous to my introduction. Indeed, he had. I advised Nicole, Baumhover went on to say, that I am now her point of contact regarding this case and that Special Agent Kobach would attend other cases he was assigned to at CBI. Now, I believe that probably could have been the truth, but I believe also it was time for Kobach to move on. I think that Kessinger was kind of using Kobach as a crutch and maybe trying to get a little too close to him, and I'm sure detective agents, all of them, they get it all the time. Nikki was texting him in the middle of the night, oh, I remembered something, and hanging on the phone, and I don't know, it was getting a little inappropriate, and I feel like she often wasted his time, so I believe that's also the reason why they probably just handed her over to Baumhover to say, look, maybe you need to switch this up. Baumhover went on to write, Nicole acknowledged this information and presented me with a 7-page typed document she generated containing notes of events she had recalled since her last meeting with Special Agent Kobach. The events documented reportedly occurred between June 25th, 2018 through August 13th, 2018. I advised Nicole I would review the notes she provided me, along with the reports and recordings from all the previous interviews. Boy, he had his work cut out for him. And contact her with any follow-up questions I may have. Nicole acknowledged my statement, and our meeting ended shortly thereafter. So that was a short meeting, and it must not have been recorded. Well, maybe it was, but I don't know where this video interview with Baumhover and Nicole could be. Special Agent Kobach agreed to complete a follow-up interview with Nicole's friend and provide me the reports. While at the CBI headquarters, I took custody of Nicole's cell phone, an iPhone 6, which she had previously surrendered to Special Agent Kobach. I placed the cell phone into evidence and entered the CBI chain of custody form into the case file, nothing further. So that's what he wrote, and it makes sense that, they were just handing it back off. I'm sure Kobach, being with the CBI, not with the local Frederick Police Department, had to go back to wherever he normally lives and works in Colorado. So if you look at the next page in the right-hand side, Baumhover wrote, "Notes received from Nicole Kessinger on September 4th, 2018. So Nicole Kessinger then went on to note the things she experienced in person with Chris Watts, as opposed to the things that he told her by text or other means on the phone. So the first page of her 7-page note starts out stating, number 1, approximately June 25th or 26th of 2018, in person. First of all, Nicole says she asked Chris Watts when he and Shanann had decided to separate. Nikki says he told me late March, early April 2018. Now, of course, Chris Watts even himself admits to lying to Nicole about a lot of things, so we don't know what is her lies, his lies, or the person's own point of view or paradigm. It did, however, remind me of that lawyer who by happenstance ran into Shanann Watts in approximately March or April 2018 at the hibachi restaurant, and he said Shanann was interested in Colorado divorce laws, 50-50 splits, who gets the kids. He talked to her a little bit about what happened in her first marriage, so it brought me into that mind state. However, that doesn't mean that Chris and Shanann had actually spoken about separating. Maybe they did. Maybe it's something that was brought up early in March or April. I know Shanann's friend Lauren has given interviews, Lauren Arnold. I remember she kind of spoke of Chris kind of changing, being a little bit more distant, even perhaps in March or April. So I feel like there's something was going on. I even feel like if Shanann and Chris had decided to separate or just started talking about it in March or April, I believe that's one reason they may have also decided to start trying for a baby. Maybe in March or April they felt the pangs of maybe we should separate, and I wonder if that's when they decided to start to try for a third trial, and that's why they would have conceived around then. Continuing with Nikki's note, she said, I asked if he still lived with her, and he told me yes. So obviously I think she would have known that. From her first emails with Chris, she would have known he was still married. Nikki said, and she doesn't write necessarily in complete sentences, and there are things that she's misspelled, so it's a little bit odd to me. But she goes on to say, said that when she was home, he slept in a different room, and when she was gone, he would occasionally sleep in the master bedroom, but not frequently because the bed was uncomfortable. Another thing I've noticed about this note thus far, Nikki uses CW for Chris Watts and SW for Shanann Watts. Now, we know that's something that's pretty common in the world of Facebook groups and maybe even in police notes. I noticed they use different triangles, and they use, RP for reporting person. So I'm not sure if Nikki was just being succinct by using their initials or if it was more distancing language. I'm going to see I don't know if she mentions the name Chris or Shanann at all, only their initials, just to separate herself more from the couple, as she called them, that couple, or also if she's trying to ingratiate herself even more with these cops to say, look guys, I can kind of use initials too, I'm just like you guys. So she's claiming that Chris told her he slept in a different room when Shanann was home, and when she was gone he would occasionally sleep in the master bedroom, but not frequently because the bed was uncomfortable. I don't know if that's, a line of baloney, because it was a Posturepedic, I do believe. Definitely the pillows, because I remember that photo where cute little Bella was trying to balance her sippy cup on top of the pillows, and she succeeded. Nikki goes on, I asked why he had decided to separate from SW. CW told me SW was, quote, bossy. Nikki wrote, I asked what he meant by bossy. CW responded that she was controlling. So we have she, or we have SW. We don't have Shanann. And we have CW, and we have he, but we don't have Chris. We don't have his name. And I don't see the kids' names yet, but we will keep looking to see what her pattern is. CW responded that she was controlling, said that they don't argue much though, said that once many years ago he attempted to stand his ground with her and she told him, get out of my house, that's a quote, and made him leave for a night. CW said he tried to avoid arguments ever since then, said now if him and SW disagreed, she would make nasty comments to him, and he would just ignore them. Now that sounds exactly like what Chris Watts told police in February 2019, when he explained during that Wisconsin interview that allegedly way back in the day, before they even got married, Chris and Shanann, but he had obviously lived in her first North Carolina home, that beautiful big home. He slammed the door. They were having some type of argument, and that's when he claimed Shanann said, get the F out, and he had to go away for the night, and I don't know where he went, because I don't think he drove all the way back to his parents' home. I always wonder where he slept that night. Did he sleep in a car, or did he get a hotel room? Where did he go? And did that one incident from 2011, sit with him over the years? And was that one of the things, obviously, that he kept remembering it? Because he obviously told it to Nikki, this incident. He obviously recounted it to police. Obviously this is one of those things, one of those, pegs or in the road or bumps in the road that stuck in his mind, that he never expressed to Shanann just how much it bothered him. I think there are a lot of these things we're going to see throughout Nikki's letter that Chris Watts just let fester and boil until he exploded into rage. Because we're going to compare some of the incidents that Nikki talks about and compare them to what he told author Sherilyn Cadle about the same thing. But when you see certain consistencies through certain stories, you can kind of believe that might have been true if the same story was told to several different people. And that's the same thing he told Sherilyn, that whenever he disagreed with Shanann, Shanann allegedly made nasty comments to him and he would ignore them. That's the same thing he told Cadle, that he would just stand there in his mind and think of all these retorts or crazy things he probably thought about. He probably fantasized about what he did. Probably he might have been fantasizing about what he ultimately did for months on end, instead of trying to find a healthy way to express his disappointment, whatever he was feeling. Back to Nikki's letter. Quote, I asked if she talked like that in front of his kids. He said yes, my kids started to repeat her words, and that is why I wanted the separation. Asked him what he said to his kids when they repeated SW's words. CW said he would tell his children that, quote, it was not nice to say that to anybody. I wish they had some specifics. I remember Nikki talked about, in one of her interviews, she claims that Chris Watts told her that Shanann said, oh, shut up, you don't know anything. And then the girls must have said the same thing. Nikki said, I asked Chris if Shanann was bossy in front of his friends. Now, she doesn't say Chris. She never, I don't see Chris or Shanann in here anyway, but I'm going to use the names Chris because it gets confusing saying CW and SW all the time. I asked Chris if Shanann was bossy in front of his friends. Chris said that Shanann was all about appearances in all aspects of her life, and that in front of her friends she was occasionally bossy, but she would turn it into kind of a joke so that it was more discreet. And looks like she spelled the word discreet wrong here, along with other words she's going to spell wrong. It just looks wrong. DISCRETE is how she spelled it. Nikki went on to say, I asked him how long the communication breakdown between them had been going on. Chris said 6 years, and the last year or two were the worst. Now I always wonder what's true in this. You know, they were only married for 6 years. They had met in 2010, got married in 2012, and unfortunately he took them all out by 2018. So they were only married 6 years, and if the last year or two were the worst, it implies that something was building up in Watts, only made worse when he met Nikki. Nikki said, I asked him if he tried to communicate to her how it made him feel when she said mean comments to him. He said he tried to talk to her many times, but it fell on deaf ears. And it's interesting that she spelled deaf, D-E-F. She didn't spell it D-E-A-F. It's just kind of strange to me. I mean, I know we all make typos, of course, but I find something odd about this. Nikki said, I asked Chris if they had attempted to go to counseling to fix their problems. Chris said no. So they had never been to counseling, even though Shanann was begging him to go to counseling by the end. Chris then said that some nights he would still currently hang out next to the bed in the master bedroom with her and would try to talk to her or spend time with her until she fell asleep. Well, it says till she fell asleep. Chris tells me that the other reason he was separated is because Shanann hated that he liked to work out and eat healthy. Said that before they decided to separate, Shanann would get mad at him if he tried to go for a run at night once the kids were in bed. Said that Shanann felt it took away from time they should be spending together. Chris said that it was frustrating because when he would try to hang out with her, she didn't pay attention to him and would talk on the phone and scroll through social media instead. So we've heard before that the workout thing was an issue. I mean, it did seem like Chris liked working out more. You know, you couldn't blame Shanann for not wanting your husband off running for hours, because ultimately he used that as an excuse to go see Nikki when he wasn't really running, most likely. But we have heard from, in the Facebook groups, Chris Watts' ex-girlfriend, where she claimed that Shanann didn't want Chris going to the gym because he might meet someone there. Of course, we all play armchair quarterback, and hindsight is 20/20, but I always wish Shanann and Chris could have found a way to work out together, and we know she did like social media because obviously that was her job. Chris said that many times he would try to talk to Shanann and she would not acknowledge him, and instead would reply with, quote, "Were you talking to me? 'Cause I wasn't listening to you." Chris told me that Shanann had asked him numerous times to take pictures of them pretending to run together so that she could post it on social media, but she wouldn't actually go for a run with him. So, yeah, I mean, I know a lot of it is just the multi-level marketing posturing. I can't imagine trying to come up with something every day to pretend that Thrive is just so freaking life-changing and wonderful and you're becoming a millionaire with it. Just from my additional research all this weekend, I find so many inconsistencies. I thought about that last video where Shanann is in San Diego and she's standing around and her friend Nikki is getting a new car and they're kind of like going off about, yay, Nikki's going to quit her job. After all these years, she's going to leave her job. It's all because of Thrive. It's all great. Everything's perfect. And then when reading the discovery, I see this point where Shanann's friend Nicole is talking with the cops and she's getting angry because she's a little bit afraid. She's a little annoyed, it says. She doesn't want to come in for questioning. She was afraid for some reason she's going to be arrested, but it also said, look, she's like, look, I have to go to work. I have to work at my job as this CNP, I believe it was, some type of nurse. And I thought, wait a minute. I thought in Shanann's video she said she was quitting her job. So there are inconsistencies like that. But God bless her. God bless Nicole Atkinson. She is a hero in my mind for just raising the alarms with everyone and letting them know something was wrong with Shanann being missing. And it's because of her, I believe, thank God, Chris wasn't able to get away with as much as he would have been if someone hadn't raised the alarm until later that night or even the next day. Okay, I think we're on Nikki's second page now. Nikki says, quote, said he started waking up early to lift weights because it was something he did every day and he didn't want his routine to interfere with his time with his kiddos. There she goes again, calling them kiddos. I know it's cute to say things like kiddos or puppers or, there are all these different things, euphemisms or what have you these days, nicknames, but when Nikki says kiddos, I think it serves a dual purpose. She doesn't have to say Bella and Celeste and Nico. It doesn't personalize them as much. It distances them from her, but also it kind of makes you sound cute, like, oh, I'd be such a great stepmom. Kiddos, kiddos. Said his health was important to him and he wished that she would have been supportive and not upset. So yeah, all this stuff that Chris may have honestly expressed to Nikki, I wish he really could have found a way to express it to Shanann and, help her really listen instead of what he did. I mean, number 2, Nikki says approximately June 27th, 2018. This is when they must have returned from San Diego, June 27th, 2018, and I will verify my dates. This is what she's saying is in person. We know that Chris and Nicole had planned to hook up after the San Diego trip, so as soon as Chris Watts got back from San Diego, he was headed over to Nikki's house bringing condoms in tow. So number 2, approximately June 27, 2018, in person, Chris brings condoms to my house. One box is full and unopened. The second is a set of condoms from a partially used box. Nikki says, I ask Chris why he has a set of partially used condoms. Chris informs me that the condoms he has are from back when he was still having sex with his wife. Told me they had been, quote, sitting in a closet collecting dust, and Shanann probably did not even know they were still there. Asked him why him and Shanann used to use condoms. Chris informed me that Shanann didn't like to, quote, get messy. I was curious, so I looked up the expiration date on the condoms and noted that the unopened set expired in late 2022 and the opened set expired in early 2023. I looked up the lifespan of an unopened condom and discovered it is approximately 5 years. So she was doing her research like a real analyst. Nikki said, based on my research, I assume these condoms were manufactured in late 2017 and early 2018. So Nikki basically caught him in a lie there. Now, it may have been true that Chris and Shanann did indeed use condoms. And if it's true that Shanann didn't like to get messy, if she didn't want to or couldn't use any other form of birth control because of her condition or what have you, or if she didn't like hormones, I don't know. And if they did use condoms, and if it's true she didn't like to get messy, I feel like this is one more thing that Nikki could have held over Shanann's head in a way. Because I don't know if Nikki and Chris used those condoms, if Nikki, told them, oh, well, you don't have to use them with me. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know the birth control situation there. But I did find it interesting that Nikki is saying, wait a minute. It looks like these condoms were just made in late 2017 or also in the other box, the newer box in early 2018, the partially open box. So basically, if you just bought these condoms in 2018, then why are you telling me that they were sitting in a closet collecting dust and Shanann probably didn't even know they were still there? So that was a good research on Nikki's part. Number 3, she wrote on or shortly after July 4th, 2018. Now here it is in person. It's funny to read Nikki's versions of events compared to Sherilyn Cadle, what she was told by Chris Watts about these dates. So we know that on July 4th, 2018, Chris Watts had, according to Sherilyn Cadle, her version of events as told to by Chris Watts, Nikki had spent the night because Chris Watts didn't have to go into work on July 4th. That's why Nikki saw him in person. Nikki doesn't tell cops all these details. And by the time they woke up on July 4th, Shanann had, been blowing up Chris's phone, called him 10 times, was going off, I don't know where you are. Chris went home, and then Nikki, again, bum rushed the show, showed up at the Saratoga Trail house just without being invited. But she doesn't go into all that detail. Nikki just says on or shortly after July 4th, 2018, she probably knew exactly the date, but she didn't want to tell cops that, I bet. But she did write in person. She said, I complimented his home as being very beautiful. Chris said that he had always wanted a smaller ranch-style home. Chris said that Shanann insisted on the big house because she liked to throw parties and make it look like they had everything. I asked him what type of parties he was referring to. Chris shook his head left to right and said, just expensive parties. Quote, that's a quote. Just expensive parties. Chris then tells me that they had the house built and the only part of the design that he had any say in was the stonework and the paint color on the exterior of the house. Chris said his mortgage was $2,800 per month and he was tired of being housebroke. I asked why it was so expensive. Chris said that about $500 of the $2,800 was homeowner's insurance. I don't know if that part is right. I'd have to compare it to the notes I have and from their bankruptcy and everything, but it's probably close, I guess. We know it's not the HOA. It's not the Homeowners Association amount. That's much cheaper. Now, Nikki does go into detail, number 4, about another in-person event in July, but she does not tell the full story once more. Number 4, she writes July 14th, 2018, in person. Nikki says, went to his house to drop him off after we visited the Shelby Mustang Museum in Boulder. While at his house, I felt uncomfortable, as if I did not belong there. He had built a beautiful life, and it made me think that there was still a chance for him to fix things with his wife. Now, these feelings really could be true, but they just leave out so much. I told him that I did not think it was fair to Shanann or to me that he was trying to live 2 lives by being in a relationship with both of us at the same time. Said that I think he either needed to fix things with her and let me go, or he needed to move towards trying to finalize his divorce. Now, she might have really said that, but I don't think she's saying it the way as nicey nice as she's pretending. Like, oh, you should go fix things with your wife. I think it was more of an ultimatum. Like, look, you choose her or me right now, and you show me that I'm your choice, or else this is over. That's what I'm thinking, Nikki said. But Nikki goes on to say, I told him that I thought his problems with Shanann were fixable, and that he should focus on trying to rekindle the relationship that they had before giving up. I don't know, maybe she said that. Maybe she wanted to know that Chris gave it the good old college try with his wife one more time to make sure there was nothing left before he came over to her. Nikki says, he said that Shanann was set on separating and that so was he. He said that when Shanann wants something, she gets her way. Quote, wants something, she gets her way. I told him I did not understand why they hadn't completed the divorce after all these months if they were both so adamant about it. That's true. If she wanted it as bad as he stated, I did not understand why it seemed stagnant. So we can tell the pressure was on. She just met this man allegedly in June. And by July 14th, they're deep off into this affair, physical, emotional, everything. And she's saying, look, if you guys have been trying to get apart from each other since March or April, why is this taking so freaking long? Nikki said, at this moment, I realized that he might be lying to me about his separation. So I started quizzing him on things he had told me earlier. I asked, well, she didn't say I, she says, asked him when the last time he was intimate with his wife. Chris told me that day that the last time he and Shanann had sex was in May, but it told me on an earlier date that the two had not been intimate since March or early April. I kind of believe him here because, yeah, he was probably saying, oh, I better say May, because May was the time that Shanann had filmed that video in the kitchen, like, oops, we did it again. So he's May 25th, I believe, was the exact date. So Chris said, look, I have to say May because, Shanann, she didn't post the video till June, but she filmed the video by May. So Nikki would catch me if I said an earlier date. But Nikki is saying, look, previously he told me they hadn't been intimate since March or early April. Nikki said, I asked Chris if he used protection when he slept with her because he stated on an earlier date that he used condoms when they had sex. He told me that he had not used protection, so he knew he had to tell her, the truth, because obviously Shanann was pregnant. I don't know if Nikki knew during this day, July 14th, but I really strongly believe the possibility is, without a shadow of reasonable doubt, that Nikki already knew. She says, I asked him if he was lying about his separation. Chris said no. I asked him if he was actively trying to have a child with Shanann since they had unprotected sex. He said no. Nikki said, I left his house. So she did kind of allude to their little disagreement, but she didn't go into detail like Sherilyn Cadle did in her book. And she said, on July 14th, Chris and Nikki were headed home from the Shelby Museum and decided to stop at his house before getting something to eat. There, Nikki played with Dieter, the family dog who led her upstairs. This time she could see what things were like in their life, all the pictures of Bella, Celeste, and Shanann. She came downstairs with the most frozen, dazed, confused look on her face. She realized for the first time the life he was living, the family that would be broken to pieces because of their affair. He saw the look of despair and he put his arms around her, leading her to the couch. As they lay on the couch, she said to him, You have all this, more than most people, and we are doing this. Why are we doing this? Are you willing to give all this up? Is your relationship with your wife that bad? He told her that he and Shanann had drifted apart and they didn't talk anymore. He was not even sure in his own head that he believed that fully, yet he could see the deficit in their relationship. He told her that before he started seeing her, he and Shanann had actually decided to have a baby. More signs that he was having second thoughts. She freaked completely out, so this is what Nikki supposedly started doing. She started yelling, What the F are you doing with me then? Even though he tried to get her to stay and talk with him, she left the house and she went out to her truck. She sat there for 30 minutes texting him. Whatever he said to her as he was texting back to her worked. In his words, he talked her off the cliff. She wanted him to make her feel better and to come after her, but he didn't. Yeah, he probably didn't want his neighbors seeing him running after some strange woman in her truck wherever she was parked. As he thought about it, he realized this is one of the things that turned him on about her. She allowed him to calm her down by telling her he did not want another baby with Shanann. He withheld the information that Shanann was already pregnant. So even though he withheld that information and didn't talk about it directly with Nikki, probably may have already known in the back of her mind or was in denial perhaps. He told her the plans to have another baby were before he had met Nikki. It had been a way to possibly save their marriage, but it wasn't working. I really don't think Shanann was looking at it this way, Cadle says. She was looking at it as a blessing, the baby boy. Nikki came back into the house. She told him he was the only man she ever met that tried to fix problems, smooth it over, talk things out. He thought, ironically, he had never tried to do that with Shanann. He knew she probably wouldn't listen to him, yet he didn't really give her a chance. They had never really talked about things. He just always let her make the decisions. So then Nikki asked him then to come back over her house like nothing had happened. And they went back to her house and made love, but it wasn't as passionate as before. If you want to read the rest of it, just go ahead and find that link below. So back to Nikki's letter. I just wanted to show you the different versions of events. And it could have been true, with Nikki finally going upstairs and looking all around, seeing everything. And she may have seen other things that let her know, I wonder, in my personal opinion, did she realize, wait, this man is pretty enmeshed in this marriage and fatherhood, and maybe he is just jerking me around, and maybe he really won't leave his wife for me. We know she was concerned about that with her Google searches, man I'm marrying says he'll leave his wife, blah, blah, blah. Now, let's get back into her 7 pages of notes. Approximately July 15th through July 19th, 2018, continued from above conversation. Nikki wrote text and person. He tells me that he still wants a separation, but this time he states it is because he has never met anyone like me. So maybe that made Nikki a little nervous, like maybe it's not really Shanann, it's because of Chris. And I'm the catalyst. She continued, told him that he better not be doing that for me and that he needs to be leaving his current situation because it is what he and her both felt is best, the best for their kids and for themselves. Now, I totally understand that. I'm not saying it's right to be a mistress and, set your sights on some married man, but if a guy who's married, falls in love with his mistress or vice versa, yeah, you don't want all that pressure on you as a mistress to say that's why he left his marriage. You want the marriage to break up for reasons other than you. Nikki wrote, we spoke over the next several days and spent a little time together, but I did not want to be intimate with him. So that's a little weird because she's trying to say, okay, maybe she did pull back just a little, but according to Cheryl Lynn's book, they went right back home and made love that day after their argument. Nikki says, I kept telling him that I thought he really needed to fix things with her and to not worry about building a relationship with me anymore. Maybe this is Nikki's mind games. Whatever happened at the house that day, July 14th, whether she already knew Shanann was pregnant or whether she had just discovered that they were still trying or the pictures of the family freaked her out, whatever freaked her out, I think Nikki started playing her games like, look, yeah, I don't really want to be intimate with you until, just go fix stuff with your wife or you make sure it's really done. And, just pulling back. Don't worry about me. Don't worry about me. You go fix things with her, because Nikki could tell he was dragging his feet on getting this divorce. Because honestly, it doesn't, when you do want a divorce, I mean, of course, divorces can take a really long time, splitting up the property, getting lawyers if you use them, and all that stuff, of course. A lot of states require you to be separated for 6 months first. So yeah, there's a lot of machinations to undertake. But if you're serious about divorce, you would see movement. You would see lawyers. You would see some things in motion. And obviously with Nikki Googling stuff like, marrying your mistress or man I'm having an affair with says he will leave his wife, she was worried that Chris really wouldn't leave Shanann. Nikki wrote, told him that I had been asked out on 2 dates since I had known him and that I didn't go on either one and that I was stood up. So she's really playing that game like, look, I don't really want to be into it with you. You go fix things with your wife. Look, I turned down 2 dates for you, even though she did admit she was stood up. She said, told him that he took the respect and trust from our relationship because I felt like he was lying. You have to laugh when you're talking about an adulterous affair. And then Nikki's saying, look, you took the respect and trust from our relationship because I know it was kind of built on a lie. Not that it couldn't have changed. Maybe it could have. Would Chris really have left Shanann for Nikki? He may have. But I just don't understand why he did the insane flip, creating this tragedy with Nikki as the catalyst. It's just ridiculous, mind-boggling. Okay, Nikki wrote, July 20th, 2018, continued from above conversation. And she wrote, this was in person. So I guess a few days have passed since their argument, nearly a week. She said, we attempt to have sex 4 times that evening. I'm like, yowza, my goodness, what the heck? Does Thrive contain some testosterone or something for low T guys? I mean, what the heck? Or maybe it's just her natural libido, but she's like, we attempt to have sex 4 times that evening, and he seems mentally interested, but physically cannot perform. I asked him what the problem was several times, and he kept telling me that nothing was wrong. I told him that he was quiet that day, and it seemed like he had something on his mind. I asked him if what was bothering him had to do with the convo that occurred the previous weekend. Chris said yes, told me that initially he was mad that I had been asked out on dates, but then felt that he couldn't be mad because that would make him a hypocrite. Said what was really bothering him was that I kept asking him to try and fix things with Shanann. Chris told me that he would attempt to fix things with her when he was in North Carolina and that he didn't want to talk about it anymore while he was home. The sex from then on for the rest of the relationship was greatly reduced from 3 to 4 times daily to 1 or maybe 2 times, and was not, she says, an intimate when it occurred. I think she means it was not as intimate when it occurred. Sex no longer happened every day we hung out, but was still very frequent. So yeah, that can happen with affairs or anything. It can be hot and heavy, and then according to her, cutting it down to 1 to 2 times a day and it changed in the level of intimacy. Number 5, she wrote, conversation while Chris was in North Carolina. On the phone, she says, Chris tells me that he had a conversation with his buddy Mark, who lives in San Diego. Says Mark informed him that many years ago he believes that Shanann was responsible for a large amount of money that was embezzled from a company that Shanann and Mark both worked for at the time, but that the company was never able to prove who did it. They're talking about Dirty South Customs. We've heard all these embezzlement rumors. We've heard, Chris's dad talk about it. We've seen lawsuit paperwork, but Shanann was never convicted of any embezzlement from the company. And I'm not sure if Nikki has it correct here. I don't think Mark ever worked for Dirty South. I could be wrong because previous videos I've gone over the interactions between Mark and Shanann on Facebook, and she quit, and Mark was saying, wait, you quit that job, that Dirty South job or whatever. He said it in a way that it sounds like he wasn't really intimately familiar with the company, so I don't think he worked there. Nikki wrote number 6, Wednesday, August 8th, 2018. Okay, in person, Chris stops by the Frederick, Colorado Toyota dealership to pick up an order of touch-up paint and windshield wipers for my vehicle after he gets off work. Now, I believe that was the same day of Shanann's ultrasound. I pre-ordered the paint several weeks earlier. He brings them to my house sometime between 3 and 4:30 p.m. that day. So yeah, he's running errands. We've seen in the Discovery where he was looking up Toyota paint and trying to help touch up paint her 4Runner. I also found when researching Nikki's calls about her, calling Toyota when she was most likely selling that truck. But that'll be a future video. Stay tuned. Number 7, Saturday, August 11th, 2018. We know this is an important day because it was her final date with Chris Watts. She wrote, in person, Chris Watts told me he didn't have any extra money for a deposit on an apartment. I told him that apartments nowadays were so expensive for rent that the damage deposits have to be fairly cheap because otherwise people can't afford move-in costs. He said that every time he got paid, he just watched his bank account dwindle down. Said he wished he had a way to prevent his disposable income from being spent. So now I think we're getting into the crux of why Chris Watts made this horrible decision that he did to take out his family, because instead of just divorce, because in his twisted mind, for some reason, he thought it was smart enough to make them all disappear and just keep his bank account and maybe pawn Shanann's ring and have the house or sell the house. And I think somewhere in his twisted mind, he was trying to logically think, yeah, if I just do away with my family, make them disappear, look at all the benefits that'll be mine. I'll have Nikki. I'll be able to sell the house without anyone raising any objections or telling me what to do. I'll be able to use my paycheck. I'll keep this job at Anadarko and I'll use my paycheck as I see fit without having to worry about child support, spousal support, and all that. I honestly think that's what was in his twisted mind. Nikki went on to write, I told him that it is possible to divide paychecks into multiple bank accounts, but that if he considered doing that, he would need to make sure he was responsible and that his mortgage and kids and his standard monthly bills were covered first. So yeah, she was just, I guess, trying to help him decide at Anadarko they can take money out and put it in different bank accounts, making sure he's not dodging his responsibilities. Nikki says, told him that if Shanann ever wanted child support, he would still be required by law to show proof of that income, even if it was in a second account. So yeah, of course, Shanann would be due child support. Generally, that's how it goes. If, it's hard to delineate how much she actually made with Thrive because MLMs can be all smoke and mirrors unless you see the actual income numbers, the actual expenses, if you saw their actual filings. My guess is Shanann actually made a lot less than Chris did, and so he would have been, of course, paying child support and maybe even spousal support. I'm not sure about the divorce laws. Nikki said, I suggested that if he decided to do that, perhaps just contribute a small amount that wouldn't impact his current living situation, but would give him a cushion for the first month's bills when he transitioned to an apartment, but that was his discretion. So yeah, she was all up in his money and trying to help him supposedly, cushion, maybe hide a little bit from his ex-wife, as she called him in the first interview. Nikki went on to write, Monday, August 13th, 2018, continued from above conversation. Even though this is a different day, that was, the D-Day, unfortunately. She wrote, text or phone. Suggested the bank account idea again after he told me that he thought Shanann was gone for the night at a friend's house. So Nikki is saying, look, get your money together. And she's claiming she thinks that Shanann was just gone for a night at a friend's house, and I'll give her the benefit of the doubt if she really thought Shanann just, like Nikki says, I just thought she left. This girl, I thought she just left. Let her effing go. If she really thought that, Nikki's suggesting bank account ideas. She's trying to help Chris Watts protect his money. After all, she's looking at herself as, look, I'm going to be Mrs. Watts 2.0, so I better make sure his money's protected. Nikki wrote, asked him if any money was missing from their bank account. Chris said no. Okay, Tuesday. She wrote, Tuesday, August 14th, 2018, continued from above conversation. I don't know why she keeps writing continued from above conversation. Well, I guess so, because this one's really about a bank account again. Text. Chris told me he opened up a second bank account so he could start saving for an apartment. Now that would have thrown a billion red flags, I would believe. Tuesday, they haven't come home, quote unquote. Shanann and the kids are still missing, and Chris is texting Nikki to say, hey, I opened up a second bank account so I could start saving for my apartment. Really weird. Did he actually open up a second bank account on Tuesday, August 14th, 2018? I don't think so. I don't remember evidence of that anywhere in the discovery. I remember that was the day he gave those horrible porch interview, but I don't know. Okay, so number 8. Now Nikki goes back to Monday, August 13th, 2018. I say she's doing this not necessarily in chronological order, but topical order. That Monday, by text message, this is what she says happened. Chris informs me his family is gone and asks me to call him when I have a chance. When I called Chris, he informed me that the cops were at his house and that he would need to call me back. I was unaware that his wife had missed a doctor's appointment, or that his kids missed school that day, or that her friend had tried to contact her and couldn't, or that he had tried to call her and didn't get a response, or that her friend had stopped by the house hours earlier to check on her. I asked him why the cops were there. CW informed me that SW friend Nicole had called them. Chris says the media are arriving. I was confused and asked him why they were there. Chris tells me that Nicole called the media. I asked Chris why he believed Nicole would call the cops and the media. He said Nicole wasn't being very nice to him. Informed me that she was sitting in her car on the phone with Shanann's mom. I asked, or she just says asked, how Nicole knew Shanann Watts' mom. Chris informed me that Nicole used to work with Shanann's mom. I asked if he thought maybe Nicole was the friend that was helping Shanann to get away for a day. Chris said no. Why would Nicole be helping Shanann if she's the one who called the cops? I suggested maybe it was to throw them off the trail. He did not agree. Chris asked me if he should talk to the media. I initially told him no, and then suggested that if he decided to speak to them, that maybe he could ask Shanann to bring his kids back. Was uncomfortable with him asking for my advice on the media. So I then asked him what his friends thought he should do about the media. Chris says that his friends believe that it would look bad if he didn't speak to the news, and thought that he should make a statement. Another red flag, super red flag there, in my mind. The minute Chris would have asked Nikki, should I talk to the media? I mean, heck yeah. This is not a decision of, oh, should I go in for an interrogation or something? It's, if you are totally innocent and your wife of 6 years and your 2 daughters disappear one day and you had nothing to do with it, of course you talk to the media. You do whatever. You create posters, flyers, you get on social media, you get on YouTube, you encourage everyone to look for your wife and children. Why would it even be a question of talking to the media? It wouldn't even be a question of them necessarily. If you're worried about being suspect number 1, you throw all that out of your mind if you're indeed innocent and you just say, look, my wife and kids are missing. This is literally what happened. This is what I remember them wearing or what have you. Everybody help. You don't hesitate. You don't have questions about speaking to the media. Nikki went on to say, phone. So this must be Monday, August 13th, 2018 via the phone conversations. I asked Chris if the cops had attempted to search his friends' houses since he believed that Shanann had gone to stay with a friend. He told me no, they hadn't. I asked him why not, and he told me he didn't know why they hadn't. I asked him why Nicole did not like him. He said he wasn't sure. I asked Chris if Nicole was married and how well he knew Nicole and her husband. He informed me he didn't know her husband hardly at all. I again suggested that maybe Nicole was the one who may be helping Shanann to hide out from him for a while. Chris said maybe, but he didn't really seem like he was entertaining the idea. Asked him if he thought she was with another man. Chris said it was possible, but he didn't think so. I asked if he thought his family was in danger. Chris said that if my kids are with her, then they are safe. So that's a quote. Quote, if my kids are with her, then they are safe. Yeah, even in his lies, he tells truth. I think there's a thread of that. He knew that's something that he had also told the news, He kept saying, like, if the kids are with her, they are safe. That's one of those things that I believe is true. He knew if his kids are with their mom, Shanann, they are safe. She's not harming them. It's almost telling on himself. It's almost like he's saying, without saying it, yeah, I'm the monster. Chris Watts, I'm the monster. I'm the one they're not safe with. But he gives himself away. Nikki went on to write, never said he was worried or concerned about his family unless I prompted the question. Nikki said, looking back on everything, I'm so glad that Nicole showed up that day to check on her friend. So she gave Atkinson kudos. Now, let's look at Monday, and this is almost the end. Must be page 6 because there's really only one line on the page 7. Number 9, Monday, August 13th, 2018. By phone, Chris says his home camera shows him leaving for work at 5:15 like usual that morning. Chris tells me that his home alarm system notified him that at 9:10 his garage door opened, but that he never received a notification on his phone that it closed again. I asked him if his garage was open when he got home from work that day, and he told me no. I asked Chris if he thought that Shanann left out of the garage at 9:10 that morning. He suggested that she either left out of the garage or the back door because there is no footage of her leaving from his front door camera. I asked Chris if there was any sign of forced entry, and he told me no. Told me he didn't want to keep talking about that subject and asked me to talk about something else. Very weird. If all this is true, Nikki's asking these pointed questions. Was there sign of forced entry? You think Shanann went out the back, all that. And then Chris is saying, I don't want to keep talking about that subject. Let's talk about something else. That's just so strange. So that's Nikki's 7 pages of notes. After that, it kind of just goes into the CBI property evidence form. It says, received this date. This is the evidence received from Nicole Kessinger. It goes into her Apple iPhone 6 and other notes. In some ways, I do feel sorry for her if it's true that she honestly had no idea what Chris is planning. And I believe maybe Nikki wanted to honestly go back and redo a bunch of things if she could do them. I'm sure she wishes she never met Chris Watts or never went after him or whatever. But even if that part still happened, I bet she wishes she could go back and redo all of her interviews, be a lot more empathetic, a lot more caring. If she honestly was only guilty of, having an affair with a married man and probably, kind of pushing him, come on, let's get divorced here. Let's really get this thing rolling. But she truly believed, and honestly, she probably knew Shanann was pregnant a lot earlier. Maybe there was a lot of callousness. Maybe she would not have minded him leaving his pregnant wife and their children. Honestly, it probably happens a lot more than we think. Men leave their pregnant wives and their children. They go off and marry their mistresses. If it would have happened this way, it might have worked out in the end. Who knows? Him and Nikki might have even gotten married. They may have stayed married for 20 years or longer. They might have been divorced in a year or two. Who knows? My point is, Nikki may not have honestly had any idea of the destructive, horrible crime that Chris Watts was preparing to commit just to try and be with her and be free of his other quote-unquote problems. So in that respect, I feel sorry for her. I think Nikki's most guilty of trying to do damage control when it came to her own reputation. Maybe she honestly was afraid of getting arrested. She didn't perhaps know what the cops would find out. There was all the deletion of the text and phone messages, and there was so much evidence that we have not seen that I hope we can see at some point. But if it were just a matter of her trying to manage her reputation, that's one thing. If it's a matter of her knowing a lot more and encouraging him to do dark deeds, okay, that's quite another. But all we know is innocent until proven guilty, so we're going to make the assumption that Nikki is innocent and had no idea of what Chris Watts is planning. And that's the part of me that feels sorry for her, because maybe in her own twisted psychology, she just wanted Chris Watts at all costs, to be married to him, to have a different lifestyle, to do certain things, to have him as her husband, and to say, who gives a flip about your wife and kids to a certain extent. But maybe she didn't know it would end in this tragedy that would pit her as this most hated woman in the world, stone cold, heartless woman on Netflix and YouTube aplenty, and whose name will always be mud while she's probably living on this earth. That's the part of me that feels sorry for her if she had no idea what Watts was planning. So that was her 7 pages of notes. I'm sure she could write an entire book that contains a lot more truth, but again, I don't think she ever will, because she knows just how bad it makes her look. Let's close with 1 Peter 2:24. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for a future video where we dig into those 663 calls, which I've researched and have, it's interesting to see what develops when you look at them all in the spreadsheet form, and Nikki's pattern of talking to different people and who she talks to and when. And you get a good perspective of a person by looking at their phone logs for a couple of months, which is what we have from the discovery. All of this is public record provided by the Weld County DA. As usual, as always, thank you so much for watching and subscribing.